The bathroom door wasn't going to hold much longer. I pressed my spine against the cold tile wall, legs braced against the vanity, feeling each scratch through the cheap wood like fingernails on my bones. 3 hours I'd been trapped in here, watching the doorknob twist left, then right, then left again with mechanical patience. "David," it whispered through the crack under the door using my mother's voice. Then, without warning, it screamed the same name in my own voice, a sound I'd never made, full of rage I'd never felt. The pattern never changed. Whisper, scream, scratch. Whisper, scream, scratch. Like it was teaching itself how to be human through repetition. The rule list lay crumpled in my lap. 9 careful instructions now decorated with my blood from where I'd punched the mirror 2 hours ago. The paper felt wrong against my skin, too warm, almost breathing. I'd memorized every word over the past 7 days, followed them with religious dedication. Never answer knocks after midnight, always set a place for the temporary roommate, keep the curtains drawn during the new moon. But now, trapped between the bathtub and the inevitable, I finally understood what Mrs. Chen had tried to tell me. The rules weren't a protection manual. They were preparation instructions, like marinating meat before cooking. Each violation didn't bring punishment, it brought transformation. The building wasn't haunted, it was hungry. My phone showed 3:47 a.m., 13 minutes until the safe hour according to Rule 8, but that assumed the rules were meant to keep me safe. The scratching stopped. In the silence, I heard something worse. My own voice from the other side, reciting my social security number, my ex-wife's birthday, details no recording could know. It was learning me from the inside out. I looked at my hands in the dim light from my phone. The nails were already too long, and underneath the quick, something black was growing. 7 days ago, I'd been desperate for a cheap apartment. Now I understood why the rent was so low. The building didn't want money. It wanted ingredients. 7 days before I barricaded myself in that bathroom, I stood outside 4247 Clement Street with my phone pressed to my ear, listening to my lawyer explain why I was about to lose everything. The divorce had drained my savings, my credit was destroyed, and the family court judge had given me 30 days to secure stable housing or lose weekend visitations with Emma. 30 days that had shrunk to 4. I'd answered 43 apartment listings that week. Too expensive, credit check failed, already rented. The rejections blurred together into a single message. You're not welcome here. My car held everything I owned, packed in garbage bags and Amazon boxes. The motel, charging $60 a night, was bleeding me dry. I needed a miracle, and that's exactly what the Craigslist ad promised. Downtown efficiency, utilities included, $400 a month, available immediately, no credit check required. The price was impossible. Downtown studios ran $2,000 minimum. Either the listing was a scam or the apartment was a crime scene. Standing there on Clement Street, staring up at a perfectly maintained Victorian building with restored gingerbread trim and period windows, I knew something was wrong. Buildings like this didn't offer apartments for $400. Yet here was Mr. Petrov, the landlord, fumbling with the keys while sweat ran down his temples despite the October chill.
"Is good apartment," he said, his accent thick with Eastern European consonants. "Very quiet, no parties. You have job." I told him about my position at the accounting firm, steady employment for 8 years. He nodded rapidly, too many times, like a broken bobblehead. When he opened the building's front door, he stepped aside and gestured for me to enter first. He stayed on the sidewalk. "You go look, 3B, 3rd floor. Door is open." He pushed the keys into my hand. His fingers were ice cold and trembling. "You like, you take. First month and deposit today, cash only." "Aren't you coming up?" I asked. His face went pale. He backed away 2 steps, then caught himself and forced a smile that never reached his eyes. "Bad knee. You go. Is good apartment. Previous tenant, she moved suddenly, left everything clean." Salvation versus suspicion warred in my chest as I climbed those stairs alone. The building was silent except for my footsteps, but the silence felt watched. Every door I passed was closed, no sounds of life behind them. The hallway smelled like vanilla candles trying to mask something medicinal. But Emma's next visit was in 5 days, and I needed an address that would satisfy the court. I should have run when Mr. Petrov refused to cross the threshold. Instead, I climbed toward 3B, ignoring how the temperature dropped with each step. The building felt different, empty. My footsteps echoed too loud in the stairwell as I hauled the first box up to 3B, each sound bouncing back like the walls were reminding me they were listening. The relief of having keys in my pocket, of having somewhere to sleep that wasn't a motel with hourly rates, made me ignore how the deadbolt stuck when I tried to unlock it. When it finally gave, I noticed the scratches. Fresh ones, bright silver against the brass, like someone had been trying to pick it from the inside.
The apartment smelled like someone had just left. Not the musty vacancy I expected, but the particular scent of a lived-in space. Coffee, fabric softener, and something sweet I couldn't place. The previous tenant hadn't just moved suddenly, she'd moved without taking anything. Dishes still in the drying rack, a half-read novel face down on the coffee table, even a glass of water on the nightstand with condensation still clinging to the sides. The fridge hummed with power, and when I opened it, I found milk that hadn't expired, fresh vegetables, and a takeout container with Chinese food that was still warm. I should have left then. Instead, I told myself she was a flight risk, someone running from debt or an abusive relationship, and I'd lucked into a furnished place. The building's silence pressed against my eardrums as I carried boxes up 3 flights, broken only by the sound of doors opening. Not enough to see through, just the soft click of latches releasing. When I turned, every door was closed, but I felt them watching, through peepholes, through the gaps where door met frame, measuring my movements like predators calculating distance. Behind the radiator in the bedroom, I found the drawing, a child's work, crayon on construction paper, showing what was supposed to be a family. 5 stick figures stood in front of a building that looked exactly like this one, but their arms were too long, ending in points that scratched through the paper. The largest figure, the one that should have been an adult, had its head tilted at an impossible angle, mouth open wide enough to swallow the others. At the bottom, in careful block letters, "We live in the walls now." The building settled around me as I stood there holding the drawing, and I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was full of held breath, of waiting. Every creak of settling wood sounded like footsteps, every whisper of pipes like conversation happening just out of range. I'd been here 20 minutes and already knew 3 things. The previous tenant hadn't moved anywhere, my neighbors weren't going to introduce themselves, and whatever I'd signed up for by putting cash in Mr. Petrov's shaking hands was going to cost more than $400 a month. I taped the drawing to the wall, a warning to myself that something here was fundamentally wrong. Then I unpacked my daughter's photograph and placed it face down in the top drawer, where whatever lived in the walls couldn't see her. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, the beam cutting sharp shadows across the unfamiliar furniture. No storm outside, no blown fuses I'd tripped. Everything had been fine a second ago. The breaker box had to be somewhere. Mr. Petrov hadn't mentioned it, but logic said kitchen or hallway closet. I checked the kitchen first, pulling open cabinets that smelled faintly of someone else's spices, but found nothing. The hallway closet was next, crammed with the previous tenant's winter coats that brushed against my arms like unwanted touches. Behind the coats, bolted to the back wall, was the breaker panel. I popped it open, expecting the usual switches, but something else caught the light. A yellowed envelope taped to the inside of the door, marked "For the New Resident" in faded ink. My fingers hesitated on the tape. This wasn't standard maintenance. Curiosity won, and I peeled it free, the adhesive pulling away with a sound like tearing skin. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick and aged, like something from an old ledger. The handwriting was precise, almost elegant, listing 10 rules in black ink that had bled slightly into the fibers. Rule 1, do not open the door to knocks after midnight, no matter how urgent the voice. Rule 2, set an extra place at the table each evening for the temporary roommate, but never look directly at them. Rule 3, during the new moon, keep all curtains drawn and avoid windows from dusk until dawn. I read on, the words growing stranger with each line. Rule 4, if you hear singing from the vents, hum along quietly. Do not try to find the source. Rule 5, never use the oven after 10 p.m. It attracts unwanted attention. Rule 6, accept no gifts from neighbors, even if they seem harmless. The list continued, each instruction more unhinged than the last, blending mundane advice with outright paranoia. Rule 7, avoid mirrors after dark. Reflections can lie. My stomach dropped. I'd used the bathroom mirror not 10 minutes ago, brushing my teeth under the vanity light, staring at my tired eyes without a second thought. The rule stared back at me now, underlined twice, as if emphasizing my mistake. Rule 8, if something whispers your name from behind a closed door, respond only with silence. Acknowledging it gives it power. Rule 9, do not search for Rule 10. It finds you when you're ready. And that was it. No explanations, no signature, just these 10 commandments for surviving in 3B. Rational thought screamed hoax, some elaborate prank by bored tenants or a deranged former occupant trying to scare newcomers. But the visceral certainty hit harder, a bone-deep knowing that these weren't suggestions, they were lifelines in a place where the rules of reality bent. The paper trembled in my hand, not from fear exactly, but from the way the building seemed to lean in, its silence now thick with expectation. I'd broken Rule 7 already, and in that moment, as the power hummed back on without me touching a switch, I felt it. Something in the apartment knew I was here, and it was pleased. I folded the list and slipped it into my pocket, telling myself I'd laugh about this tomorrow. But as midnight approached, the first soft knock echoed from the front door, and I knew laughter was the last thing coming. 7 days before I barricaded myself in that bathroom, I stood outside 4247 Clement Street, with my phone pressed to my ear, listening to my lawyer explain why I was about to lose everything. The divorce had drained my savings, my credit was destroyed, and the family court judge had given me 30 days to secure stable housing or lose weekend visitations with Emma. 30 days that had shrunk to 4. I'd answered 43 apartment listings that week. Too expensive, credit check failed, already rented. The rejections blurred together into a single message, "You're not welcome here." My car held everything I owned, packed in garbage bags and Amazon boxes. The motel charging $60 a night was bleeding me dry. I needed a miracle, And that's exactly what the Craigslist ad promised. Downtown efficiency, utilities included, $400 a month, available immediately, no credit check required. The price was impossible. Downtown studios ran $2,000 minimum. Either the listing was a scam or the apartment was a crime scene. Standing there on Clement Street, staring up at a perfectly maintained Victorian building with restored gingerbread trim and period windows, I knew something was wrong. Buildings like this didn't offer apartments for $400. Yet here was Mr. Petrov, the landlord, fumbling with the keys while sweat ran down his temples despite the October chill. "It's good apartment," he said, his accent thick with Eastern European consonants. "Very quiet, no parties. You have job?"
I told him about my position at the accounting firm. Steady employment for 8 years. He nodded rapidly, too many times, like a broken bobblehead. When he opened the building's front door, he stepped aside and gestured for me to enter first. He stayed on the sidewalk. "You go look, 3B, 3rd floor. Door is open." He pushed the keys into my hand. His fingers were ice cold and trembling. "You like, you take. First month and deposit today. Cash only." "Aren't you coming up?" I asked. His face went pale. He backed away 2 steps, then caught himself and forced a smile that never reached his eyes. "Bad knee. You go. Is good apartment. Previous tenant, she moved suddenly. Left everything clean." Salvation versus suspicion warred in my chest as I climbed those stairs alone. The building was silent except for my footsteps, but the silence felt watched. Every door I passed was closed, no sounds of life behind them. The hallway smelled like vanilla candles trying to mask something medicinal. But Emma's next visit was in 5 days, and I needed an address that would satisfy the court. I should have run when Mr. Petrov refused to cross the threshold. Instead, I climbed toward 3B, ignoring how the temperature dropped with each step. By day 3, the gouges in the hallway floor had become just another unexplained scar in my new life, like the divorce papers I kept folded in my wallet. I'd spent the morning scrubbing them with a wire brush, pretending it was normal wear from movers, but the wood splintered under my efforts, as if something had clawed its way up from below. The security footage from the building's ancient camera showed nothing. No visitor, no animal. Just an empty corridor staring back at me like a challenge. I locked the door twice that night, telling myself the rules were working, that ignoring the knock had bought me safety. But as I sat down to a microwave dinner of frozen lasagna, the air in the apartment shifted, thickening like someone had exhaled right behind my ear. It started in my peripheral vision, a shape at the edge of the kitchen table, humanoid but blurred, like heat haze over asphalt. I turned my head sharply, and it vanished, leaving only the empty chair I'd pushed in that morning. My pulse quickened. Rule number 2 flashed in my mind, the one about setting an extra place for the temporary roommate. I'd dismissed it as nonsense when I first read the list, but now, with the apartment's silence pressing in, I stood up slowly and grabbed a second plate from the cabinet. The porcelain clinked too loudly against the formica, and I could swear the shape flickered back into view, waiting. Normalcy versus madness blurred as I followed the instructions to the letter. I portioned out half my lasagna onto the extra plate, added a fork and napkin, even poured a glass of water from the tap that tasted faintly metallic. The rules were specific. Leave the TV tuned to channel 4, which my set didn't have. It maxed out at 3, then jumped to static on 5. I fiddled with the remote anyway, landing on the white noise of an unassigned frequency, the screen flickering with ghost images that might have been faces if I stared too long. Never acknowledge them verbally, the list warned, so I ate in silence, chewing mechanically while the presence solidified in my side view, shoulders hunched as if mirroring my posture, but always evaporating when I tried to confirm it. The charade held through dinner. I cleared my plate, but left theirs untouched, as if expecting them to eat when I wasn't looking. Washing up, I felt it again, seated now on the couch, legs crossed in a way that mimicked how I'd sat there last night, watching reruns. The TV hissed on Channel 4, pulling in faint whispers that could have been dialogue from a show that didn't exist. I avoided glancing directly, busying myself with work emails on my laptop, but the awareness grew, a prickling on my skin, like being watched in a crowded room where everyone pretends not to see you. This wasn't a ghost. It was an imposition. A guest who'd overstayed without ever arriving. The breaking point came around 10 p.m. I'd moved to the bedroom to change, hanging my shirt in the closet, when I caught the delay in the mirror. Wait, no mirrors after dark, but I'd forgotten in my exhaustion. There it was, in the corner of my eye, standing where I'd stood 3 seconds earlier, arm raised to the hanger. I froze, testing it. I took a step left, and 3 seconds later, the shape followed, its footfall silent, but the floor creaking under an invisible weight. Panic rose. I paced to the window, and it echoed me, always lagging, closing the gap if I sped up. To avoid collision, I slowed my movements to a crawl, each step deliberate, like wading through syrup, while the presence matched me perfectly in its delayed rhythm. It was learning me, anticipating where I'd be before I got there. By midnight, I was trapped in this slow-motion dance circling the apartment to keep distance from something that shouldn't exist. The rules had turned my home into a stage for this absurdity, and as I finally collapsed into bed, leaving the TV droning in the living room, I heard the faintest sound. A chair scraping back from the table, as if my temporary roommate had finished their meal. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the thought that tomorrow's new moon would bring worse, and I hadn't even met all the neighbors yet.
The temporary roommate had vanished by morning on day 4, leaving only an empty plate at the table and the TV still tuned to that non-existent Channel 4, its static humming like a forgotten argument. I'd spent the day avoiding mirrors, moving with deliberate slowness to shake the echo of its delayed mimicry, but the apartment felt heavier, as if the presence had seeped into the walls instead of departing. By night 5, the calendar on my phone confirmed what I'd been dreading. The new moon, a sliverless void in the sky that rule number 8 had marked as forbidden territory. I'd reread the list that afternoon, the paper now creased from constant handling, its ink seeming darker against my growing doubts. Rule number 8 was the most detailed yet. Stay away from all windows after sunset, avoid any reflections, mirrors, glass, or even polished surfaces, and under no circumstances step outside between 3 and 4 a.m. The instructions felt like overkill for a simple lunar phase, but after the midnight visitor and the roommate's games, I complied at first, drawing every curtain tight and taping black trash bags over the bathroom mirror for good measure. The apartment plunged into artificial night, lit only by my phone's glow and a single lamp in the corner, its bulb casting long shadows that twisted like fingers reaching for the edges. Curiosity versus compliance began as a whisper in my mind around midnight. What harm could one peek do? I'd followed the rules so far, earned a little leeway. The building had been unnaturally quiet all evening. No knocks, no whispers from the vents, just the occasional creak of settling beams that sounded too rhythmic to be random. I paced the living room, phone in hand, scrolling through old photos of Emma to anchor myself. Her gap-toothed grin from last Christmas, the way she'd hug me goodbye after our final court-mandated visit. But the curtains called to me. Heavy velvet things left by the previous tenant, their fabric cool and slightly damp under my fingers as I approached the window facing the courtyard.
I told myself it was just to check the moon's absence, to confirm the sky was as empty as promised. Easing the curtain back an inch, I pressed my eye to the gap. The courtyard below was bathed in streetlight amber, but it was the building opposite that stopped my breath. Every window wide open, despite the chill, and in each one stood a figure. My neighbors, finally visible, but not as people. They were perfectly still, arms limp at their sides, heads tilted back to stare at the starless sky. Their eyes had rolled back to show only whites, gleaming like polished marble, mouths slack in expressions that could have been ecstasy or agony. One of them, an older woman in 2A, swayed faintly, her nightgown fluttering, but none blinked. None moved beyond that eerie vigil.
I dropped the curtain, heart slamming against my ribs, but it was too late. Something had seen me. The consequence came swift and personal. A voice from the hallway, soft at first, calling my name in my mother's timbre, the one she'd used when I was 6 and hiding under the bed after breaking her favorite vase. "David, honey, come out. I know you're scared, but it's okay. Remember that summer at Grandma's lake house when you caught your first fish and cried because it flopped so much?" The words slithered under the door, precise recollections only I could know. The smell of worm dirt on my hands, the way the sun had burned my shoulders that day, secrets I'd never shared with anyone, not even my ex-wife. Compassion tugged at me. Maybe it was a real neighbor in trouble, mimicking voices to get help, but survival instinct screamed, trap. The voice grew insistent, weaving in more memories. My first bike accident, the scar on my knee from falling off the porch steps, the lullaby Mom sang when nightmares woke me. I backed away, clamping hands over my ears, but it seeps through, now reciting the address of my childhood home, the phone number we'd had before cell phones. Between 3 and 4 a.m., it peaked, pounding on the door in rhythm with the stories, each knock vibrating through the floorboards. I huddled in the bedroom, whispering denials to myself. The rule's my only mantra. Don't go outside, don't acknowledge it. The voice knew things buried deep, things that made me question if it was pulling them from my mind or planting them there. As 4 a.m. ticked past, the pounding faded to scratches, then silence, leaving me drenched in sweat and doubt. The new moon had blinded me to the truth outside, but it had opened something inside the building, something that now knew me intimately. I didn't sleep that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the neighbor's white-eyed stares were a warning or an invitation. By dawn on day 6, a note would slide under my door, changing everything, but in that moment, I just clutched the rule list, praying I hadn't invited worse by looking.
Dawn on day 6 crept through the curtain edges like an unwelcome guest, but I hadn't moved from my spot on the bedroom floor since the hallway voice faded at 4 a.m. My mother's stolen words still echoed in my skull, twisting childhood memories into threats that made me question every secret I'd ever kept. Exhaustion pinned me down, the rule list clutched in my fist like a talisman, its edges digging into my palm as if reminding me that compliance was my only armor left. That's when I heard it, the soft scrape of paper against wood, sliding under the front door like a serpent's tongue. I froze, listening to the silence that followed, half expecting another knock or whisper, but nothing came. Curiosity dragged me to my feet, legs numb from hours of immobility, and I approached the door with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. There, on the welcome mat that wasn't mine, lay a folded note, plain white stock with no envelope, as if delivered by an invisible hand. I picked it up, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting matched the rule list, precise, almost elegant, but this time in fresh blue ink that hadn't yet dried. 7 days to acclimate, then you become permanent. Check rule number 10. My breath caught. 7 days. That was tomorrow. The words hung there, simple and final, like a doctor's diagnosis delivered without sympathy. I rushed to the kitchen table where I'd left the original list, spreading it flat under the harsh overhead light. Rules 1 through 9 stared back, ending with that ominous closer. Do not search for rule number 10. It finds you when you're ready. There was no 10th rule, no hidden text, no addendum I had missed in my frantic readings. I'd pored over this paper for days, memorizing its curves and warnings, but it stopped at 9, a deliberate cutoff that now felt like a trap springing shut. Freedom versus entrapment crystallized in that moment, sharp as broken glass. I had come here seeking escape, from debt, from loss, from a life unraveling, but this building wasn't offering sanctuary. It was a processing center, methodically breaking down its residents like raw materials in a factory. The previous tenant's sudden departure, the furnished apartment left intact, the neighbors' wide-eyed vigil under the new moon. It all clicked. They hadn't left. They'd been transformed, acclimated to something permanent, something the rules prepared you for step by violating step. Panic surged, hot and electric. One day left. Whatever fate had claimed the others, the temporary roommate's mimicry, the voice pulling secrets from my mind, was barreling toward me. I imagined them now, those former occupants not gone but embedded in the walls, their essences fueling the building's hunger. The note crumpled in my grip. I hadn't searched for rule number 10, but it had found me anyway, dangling permanence like a noose disguised as stability. I paced the apartment, mind racing for exits. The lease was month to month, but breaking it meant homelessness, losing Emma for good. Yet staying meant surrendering to this acclamation, becoming whatever whispered from the vents or stared blankly at the moon. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, alive with the weight of absorbed lives. I needed answers, someone to explain this madness. That's when the knock came, not the midnight variety, but a polite rap from next door, followed by a voice I hadn't heard before, an elderly woman's, offering tea and conversation.
The knock that followed the note's arrival wasn't aggressive like the midnight visitors. It was measured, almost polite, 3 soft raps that pulled me from my pacing stupor on day 6. I'd been staring at the crumpled message about acclamation and rule number 10, my mind spinning with visions of transformation, when her voice filtered through the door, steady and warm like a grandmother offering cookies. "Hello, new neighbor. I saw you moving in. Would you like some tea? It's Jasmine. Helps with the adjustment period here." I hesitated, rule number 6 flashing in my thoughts. Accept no gifts from neighbors, but desperation overrode caution. I needed explanations, not more riddles. Cracking the door, I saw her, an elderly Asian woman, perhaps 70, with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and a cardigan that hung loose on her slight frame. Her smile crinkled the corners of her eyes, but those eyes themselves were sharp, calculating, scanning me like a butcher appraising meat. "I'm Mrs. Chen, 3A. You've been through a lot already, haven't you? Come, my door's open." Kindness versus calculating intent warred in every gesture as she led me across the hall. Her apartment mirrored mine in layout, but felt wrong, inverted somehow. The air thicker, scented with overbrewed tea and something metallic underneath. She poured from a porcelain pot, steam rising in lazy curls, and handed me a cup without asking if I took sugar. "Drink. It settles the nerves. This building, it takes time to adjust. The rules help, don't they?" She knew about the rules. I nearly dropped the cup, the hot liquid sloshing against my fingers. "How do you—" "Everyone finds the list eventually," she said, settling into a worn armchair that creaked under her weight. Her apartment was cluttered with knickknacks, jade figurines on shelves, faded silk fans on the walls, but the locks drew my eye. 5 deadbolts on the inside of her front door, plus a chain and a bar, all gleaming new against the peeling paint. "Who are they?" I asked, nodding at the pictures. "Old memories," she replied, her smile tightening. "Better forgotten. The building prefers it that way." She leaned forward, eyes locking on mine with that piercing gaze.
You're close to the end of your week. I can see it in your face. The change is starting, but I can help. I've helped others. What kind of help? Suspicion coiled in my gut, but her kindness pulled me in, the tea warming my hands like a promise of normalcy.
First, you have to trust me. She slid a small envelope across the table, sealed with wax. Take this. It's a supplement to the list, notes I've made over the years. But you'll have to break rule number 6 to accept it. Never accept anything from neighbors, right? That's how they test you. Break it willingly, and I can show you how to stay human. I stared at the envelope, her words dangling salvation wrapped in violation. The watch ticked again, 3 minutes exactly, and she glanced at it, fingers twitching. Her apartment felt smaller suddenly, the locks not for keeping things out, but for trapping them in. I pocketed the envelope against my better judgment, the paper crisp against my skin, and excused myself, mumbling thanks. Back in 3B, the envelope from Mrs. Chen burned in my pocket like a guilty secret, its wax seal pressing against my thigh as I locked the door behind me. Breaking rule number 6 by accepting it had felt like crossing a threshold, and now doubt gnawed at me, her calculating eyes replaying in my mind, her watch's relentless ticking echoing like a countdown I couldn't stop. I couldn't trust her words about surviving 3 years. I needed concrete proof, something buried in this apartment that would expose the truth before day 7 claimed me. I started with the obvious places, methodically tearing through drawers and cabinets that still held the previous tenant's belongings. The kitchen yielded nothing but expired coupons and mismatched Tupperware, but under the sink, behind rusted pipes, I found a loose floorboard that pried up with a screwdriver. Inside was a small bundle of driver's licenses, rubber banded together, dozens of them. Faces staring up from faded plastic, men and women of all ages, their expiration dates spanning decades. Names I didn't recognize: Sarah Klein, expired 2015, Marcus Reed, 2008, Elena Vasquez, 1992. Each license listed this address, 4247 Clement Street, apartment 3B, as if they'd all called this place home before vanishing into thin air. The discovery fueled my frenzy. I moved to the bedroom closet, shoving aside coats that smelled of mothballs and stranger sweat. The back wall was plywood, but when I tapped it, a hollow echo replied. Prying it loose revealed carvings etched into the studs, desperate messages in various handwritings, some fresh, others weathered by time. Day 4. It mimics you. Don't turn around. They take your memories first. Rule number 10 is a lie. Get out before the moon. One repeated like a mantra. 7 days, then you're them. My fingers traced the grooves, feeling the panic embedded in each letter, as if the wood remembered the hands that had clawed these warnings. Research versus revelation hit me like a split-second delay, the facts colliding in ways that defied logic. I grabbed my laptop, cross-referencing the names from the licenses with public records, missing persons reports, news articles, anything. A pattern emerged. Every tenant of 3B disappeared after exactly 7 days, cases going cold with no bodies, no leads. Sarah Klein was last seen entering the building in 2015. Marcus Reed's family reported him missing in 2008 after he stopped answering calls on day 8. But when I dug into the building's official records through the county assessor's database, the narrative fractured. The deed claimed the same 4 families had occupied the units since 1978. No turnovers, no evictions, stable. Unchanging, like a snapshot frozen in time. The contradiction chilled me deeper than any rule violation. If the records were accurate, then all those licenses, all those carvings, belonged to ghosts who'd never officially existed here. I kept searching, driven by a need to unravel the lie, pulling up the ventilation grate in the hallway where cool air whispered out like breath. Inside the duct, wedged against a bend, was a dust-caked journal, its leather cover cracked and pages yellowed. The entries chronicled a woman's descent. Day 1, found the list, thought it was a joke. Day 3, the roommate eats what I leave, but I'm hungrier each night.
Day 5, my reflection smiles when I don't. The changes start in the eyes. By day 7, the writing devolved into scrawls. I see rule number 10 now. It's inside me. The building needs more. Tucked in the journal's back was a photograph. Polaroid edges curled from age, dated 1981 in faded pen. It showed a group at a building picnic, smiling faces around a barbecue, and there, in the center, was Mrs. Chen, looking exactly as she had an hour ago. Not a day older, her cardigan the same loose fit, her bun pinned just so. No silver hair then, but the same sharp eyes, the same watch on her wrist. The photo slipped from my fingers, landing face up on the floor, her unchanging gaze accusing me of digging too deep. If she hadn't aged in over 40 years, what had the building done to her? What was it planning for me? As night 6 fell, the rules on my list began to shift before my eyes, letters rearranging like living ink, forcing an impossible choice I wasn't ready to make.
The Polaroid of Mrs. Chen, unchanged since 1981, lay on the floor where I'd dropped it, her timeless eyes following me as I backed away from the vent, the journal's scrawled warnings burning in my mind like acid. Night 6 was descending fast, the apartment's shadows lengthening as if the building itself was exhaling darkness, and I clutched the original rule list, desperate for its familiar order amid the revelations of disappeared tenants and falsified records. I spread the list on the kitchen table, the paper now feeling unnaturally warm under my fingers, like skin flushed with fever. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the ink began to shift, subtle at first, a blurring of letters that I blinked away as exhaustion. But when I looked again, rule number 2 had rewritten itself. Answer the door after midnight to welcome the visitor. They bring news you need. My heart stuttered. The original had forbidden answering knocks entirely, a directive that had saved me on night 1. Now it contradicted rule number 3, which remained unchanged. Never open the door after midnight, no matter the plea. Confusion spiraled into terror. I paced the room, rereading the list obsessively, but other rules stayed fixed. Curtains during the new moon, no mirrors after dark, while this collision glared like a fracture in reality. The envelope from Mrs. Chen sat unopened nearby, a violation I'd already committed, and I wondered if accepting it had triggered this, unraveling the list's fragile logic. Order versus chaos collapsed in that moment. The rules no longer a stable guide, but a living document, morphing to reflect my growing doubts. That's when the temporary roommate returned, not in peripheral glimpses, but fully visible, materializing in the armchair across from me. It wore my face, but twisted, eyes too wide, skin stretched thin over cheekbones that protruded like they'd been carved, mouth curved in a smile that showed teeth slightly sharper than mine. I froze, the air between us thick with silence, broken only by the faint ticking of pipes in the walls. It didn't speak aloud, but its lips moved silently, forming words I could read clear as day. You broke rule number 7 first. The mirror after dark, my initial violation, now echoed back in this doppelganger's accusation, its movements syncing with mine in real time, no delay, as if it had learned everything from our earlier dance. Horror rooted me in place. I waved my hand experimentally, and it mirrored me perfectly, its twisted features mocking my every gesture, silently mouthing the same phrase on loop. You broke rule number 7 first. The realization hit like a physical blow. The rules weren't changing arbitrarily. They were changing because I was. Each violation had rewritten not just the list, but me, pulling me closer to whatever ageless fate Mrs. Chen embodied, her unlined face from 1981, a preview of the permanence awaiting on day 7. I tried to ignore it, turning away to the window, but the roommate followed, its presence a cold draft at my back, now standing where I'd stood seconds ago. The contradictory rules pulsed in my mind. Answer the door. Don't answer the door. A choice that felt engineered to force another break, accelerating the transformation. My reflection in the darkened glass, damn, another mirror slip, showed subtle shifts. My eyes darker, fingernails longer, blackening at the tips, just like the journal had described in its final entries. Panic drove me to the bedroom, slamming the door, but the roommate was already inside, perched on the bed, its distorted face inches from where I'd sleep. It mouthed the words again, relentless, while the building groaned around us, floors creaking as if shifting to accommodate my unraveling. Reality bent with each heartbeat. If I answered a knock tonight, I'd invite whatever waited outside, but ignoring it might seal my entrapment. The rules were me now, my changes feeding back into them, drawing me toward Mrs. Chen's immortal prison. As midnight struck, the knock came, polite, insistent, from the front door. My twisted double rose, gesturing toward it with my own hand, mouthing encouragement. I approached, torn between the colliding directives, when another sound interrupted. A second knock, this one from Mrs. Chen's door across the hall, her voice calling my name with that same grandmotherly warmth that had lured me in earlier. My twisted roommate watched from the bedroom doorway, its silent mouthing paused, as if even it deferred to her, while the conflicting rules warred in my head. Answer, don't answer, each choice a step deeper into transformation. I chose her knock over the front doors, cracking my door to find her standing in the hall, cardigan askew, eyes wide with feigned concern. "Come quickly," she whispered, glancing at the shadows pooling at the stairwell's end. "It's starting. You can't face it alone." Against every instinct, I followed her into 3A, the air inside thicker now, laced with a metallic tang I'd noticed before, her multiple locks clicking shut behind us like teeth in a trap.
She guided me to her kitchen table, the same one where she'd offered tea, but now it held no pot, just a single candle flickering in the dim light. "You opened my envelope?" she asked, settling across from me, her watch ticking its 3-minute rhythm. I nodded, admitting the violation of rule number 6, and she smiled, not kindly, but with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had finally erred correctly. "Good. That was the last break you needed. Now you're ready for the truth." Her words hung heavy, and I leaned forward, desperate for clarity amid the rule collisions twisting my reality. The list, it's changing. Rule number 2 says to answer the door now, but number 3 forbids it. And my roommate? It's me, but wrong. What's happening? Mrs. Chen's expression softened, but her eyes remained sharp, calculating the weight of her revelation. "The rules aren't for protection, David. They're a sieve, filtering out the weak. Rule number 10 only appears to those who've broken the first 9. It's not on paper, because it's written on the inside, visible only to the transformed." She rolled up her left sleeve slowly, revealing pale skin marred by raised scar tissue, words etched in deliberate looping script as if carved with a steady hand. "To leave, you must bring a replacement." I recoiled, the candlelight dancing over the scars, making them seem to pulse like living text. The phrase stared back, simple and monstrous, a directive that reframed every interaction in the building. You did this to yourself?" "Not at first," she said, tracing the letters with a fingernail that looked too sharp, too long. "The building does it for you, once you're acclimated. It started in 1978, when the first residents discovered what this place really is. A nexus, alive and hungry for continuity. We don't age, don't die, but our humanity fades. To maintain it, we feed the cycle, lure in replacements, let the rules break them down, absorb their essence so we can endure another stretch."
Protection versus predation merged in her explanation. Her earlier kindness now revealed as recruitment, a predator's camouflage to ensnare a next victim. She'd survived, not 3 years, but decades, by sacrificing others. Her unchanging face from the 1981 photo a testament to the toll. The neighbors, with their wide-eyed vigils and silent watching, were all part of it, trapped in the same immortal loop, passing fresh tenants like currency to stave off total dissolution. Your temporary roommate? That's your emerging self, the building's version of you. The voice in the hall? Memories harvested to bind you tighter. And me? I brought you tea to start the trust, the envelope to force the break. Without replacements, we fade into the walls, become the whispers in the vents. Horror clawed up my throat. So the note under my door, the acclamation, it's all to turn me into one of you? She nodded, rolling her sleeve down, the scars vanishing like a secret resealed. By day 7, you'll be permanent, unless you follow rule number 10. Find a replacement, someone desperate like you were, and the building lets you walk for a time. But there's an 11th rule that could break the cycle entirely, end this for all of us. She paused, her watch ticking louder in the silence, eyes distant as if weighing whether to continue. You're not ready to pay that price, though. No one ever is until it's too late. The open loop of that 11th rule dangled unspoken, a temptation she dangled, then withdrew, leaving me reeling. If rule number 10 demanded a sacrifice to escape, what horror did number 11 require? Her apartment creaked, then walls shifted subtly, as if the building approved her confession. Midnight had passed, but the final night loomed, all violations converging, and I knew I had to choose, join their cycle or burn it down, even if it consumed me first. As I stumbled back to 3B, the front door's unanswered knock resumed, pounding now with renewed fury, heralding the 7th day's dawn.
I slammed the door to 3B behind me, the pounding from the hallway echoing Mrs. Chen's revelations like a drumbeat sealing my fate. The unanswered knock, now a violation of the rewritten rule number 2, grew frantic, morphing into screams that alternated between my mother's voice and my own, wet breaths punctuating each cry. Midnight had come and gone on the 7th night, and with it the acclamation period ended. The building no longer whispered threats, but unleashed them, every broken rule converging in a symphony of chaos. The temporary roommate waited in the living room, fully visible now, its twisted version of my face grinning from the couch, silently mouthing, "You broke rule number 7 first," while mimicking my every flinch with eerie precision. As I backed away, the new moon's influence bled through despite the drawn curtains. Reflections in the window glass lied, showing me with eyes rolled back white, standing among the neighbors in their vigil. Singing erupted from the vents, a discordant hum that demanded I join in per rule number 4, but my voice cracked, inviting unwanted attention, scratches inside the walls like dozens of nails dragging toward me. The apartment itself began to shift, walls expanding and contracting with rhythmic breaths, exhaling a warm, fetid air that smelled of damp earth and forgotten memories. Floors tilted subtly at first, then steeper, sloping toward the bathroom door as if gravity had realigned to funnel me there. Something waited inside, I could hear it, a low gurgle behind the wood. Patient and hungry, the consequence of every mirror I'd glimpsed after dark, every gift accepted, every knock ignored or answered wrong. Submission versus resistance tore at me, like opposing currents in a riptide. Completing the transformation meant joining Mrs. Chen's immortal prison, ageless and trapped, luring replacements to feed the cycle and cling to fading humanity. It tempted with stability. No more divorce debts, no custody battles, just eternal vigilance in this living nexus. But escapement fleeing into the night, knowing the building would hunt me, its influence spreading like roots under the city, pulling me back through whispers and shadows. I clutched the rule list, its paper pulsing faintly in my hand, ink swirling as contradictions multiplied. Rule number 5 now commanded using the oven after 10 p.m. while another forbade it, the words bleeding into each other like wounds reopening. The roommate rose, advancing with my gait,
its sharpened teeth bared in a smile that promised unity. The pounding at the door synchronized with the wall's breaths, the floor's tilt steepening, rolling loose objects, a pen, Emma's photo, toward the bathroom where the gurgling grew louder, more insistent, like a throat clearing to speak my name.
No. Resistance won. I couldn't become them, couldn't doom another to this. Grabbing the candle from the table, its flame the only light now, as power flickered out per some unseen rule, I held the list to the fire. The paper ignited quickly, edges curling black, the rules charring into ash as acrid smoke filled the room. The roommate howled silently, dissolving into wisps that recoiled toward the vents, while the pounding ceased abruptly, replaced by a building-wide groan, as if I'd wounded it. But the response wasn't victory. It was a horrifying clarity. As the list burned to nothing, the manifestations didn't vanish. They intensified. Walls heaving faster, floors buckling, the bathroom door creaking open on its own to reveal a shattered mirror pulsing with unnatural light. The rules hadn't been restrictions to torment me, they'd been protections. Fragile barriers against something far worse lurking beneath the building's facade. A primal hunger that the list had kept at bay. By destroying it, I'd unleashed the true entity, and now it beckoned from the mirror, ready to consume what the rules had only prepared. I staggered toward the bathroom, the tilt forcing my steps, ashes scattering like breadcrumbs in my wake. Escape was impossible now, but survival demanded I fight through whatever waited behind that fractured glass, even as my reflection grinned back with too many teeth. The ashes of the burned rule list swirled in my wake as the tilting floor propelled me through the bathroom door, the gurgling sound resolving into a wet rhythmic pulse that matched my racing heart. Shards of the broken mirror, shattered since that first careless glance after dark, littered the tile, but the frame now shimmered with an otherworldly glow, edges rippling like liquid silver, inviting me to dive in.